Daphne Kendrick stood at the altar in a dress she had stitched herself, watching her younger sister Claire walk down the aisle toward the man who was supposed to marry her. The church fell silent except for the rustling of Claire's borrowed veil, the one Daphne had worn only moments before when she'd stood there waiting for Marcus to say his vows. He hadn't. He'd stammered something about needing a moment, then walked away from the altar, and Daphne had stood there in her cream-colored dress with its careful embroidery, feeling the eyes of everyone she knew burning into her back. She'd thought perhaps he was nervous, that he needed air, that this was just cold feet manifesting at the worst possible moment. But then Claire had appeared from the vestibule, no longer in her bridesmaid dress, but in something white, something that looked hastily chosen, but white nonetheless, and Marcus had returned to the altar with her hand in his. No one stopped them. The minister looked at Daphne with something like pity, then at Claire and Marcus with confusion, and then Marcus said, "I'm sorry, Daphne. I can't do this. Claire and I, we're in love. We have been for months." Months. Daphne felt the word land in her chest like a stone. Months of planning this wedding. Months of Claire helping her choose flowers and taste cakes. Months of Marcus kissing Daphne goodnight at her door while apparently kissing her sister in secret. The church was full of their friends, their family, people who had driven hours to be here, and now they were all watching Claire take Daphne's place as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Daphne's mother sat in the front pew with her hands over her mouth. Her father looked like he wanted to stand, but didn't know what he'd do if he did. Claire's eyes didn't even flicker toward Daphne as she reached Marcus's side. She just smiled up at him with the same bright joy Daphne had imagined wearing herself not 10 minutes ago. The minister cleared his throat. "I don't think this is appropriate." "We love each other," Claire said, her voice ringing clear through the church. "Isn't that what matters? Isn't love what a wedding is supposed to be about?" Daphne felt her face burn. She should leave. She should walk down the aisle and out the door and never look back, let them have their spectacle of a wedding, let everyone whisper about her for the rest of her life. She gathered her skirt in one hand, ready to flee, but her legs felt like water, and her vision was blurring with tears she refused to let fall in front of all these people. Then someone moved in the back of the church. He was tall enough that she noticed him even through her haze of humiliation. White hair that fell past his shoulders, skin so pale it seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through the stained glass windows. He wore a black suit that looked like it cost more than everything in the church combined, and he walked down the aisle with the kind of confidence that made people lean away from him instinctively. Daphne had never seen him before. She would have remembered. He stopped beside her at the altar, and she realized with a start that he was even taller than she'd thought. 6.5 feet at least, with a face that looked carved from marble and eyes so dark they seemed black. He looked at Marcus and Claire with an expression of such cold contempt that Claire actually took a step back. Then he turned to Daphne and held out his hand. "Enough of this," he said. His voice was deep and smooth and accented in a way she couldn't place. Old-fashioned, maybe. European. "You will not be humiliated further. I don't know you," Daphne whispered, "and yet I am the only one here treating you with the respect you deserve." His hand remained extended. "Take it." She didn't know why she obeyed. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the way he looked at her like she mattered, like she was someone worth defending, when everyone else in the church was still staring at Claire and Marcus like their love story was something romantic instead of something cruel. Daphne placed her hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that surprised her, given how hard the rest of him seemed. He turned to face the congregation, pulling her to stand beside him. "I am Valdren Silvastian," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the church. "And this woman is my bride. There will be no other wedding here today." The church erupted. People started talking all at once. Marcus sputtered something about this being insane. Claire's face went red and then white, and the minister just stood there looking like he'd stumbled into a dream he couldn't wake from. Through it all, Valdren stood perfectly still with Daphne's hand in his, unmoved by the chaos he'd created. "You can't just claim someone," Marcus said, finding his voice. "Daphne, tell him. Tell him you don't know him." Daphne opened her mouth, but Valdren spoke first. She knows me well enough to know I would never betray her with her own sister." He looked at Marcus with those unsettling dark eyes. "Which is more than can be said for you." "This is ridiculous," Claire said. Her voice had gone shrill. "Daphne, stop being dramatic. Marcus and I are in love, real love. You'll find someone else." "She already has," Valdren said calmly. "Me." He started walking, and because he still held her hand, Daphne walked too. Down the aisle, past all the staring faces, past her parents who looked too shocked to react, past the friends who'd known about Claire and Marcus and said nothing. The church doors opened, and then they were outside in the cool autumn air, and Daphne's legs finally gave out. Valdren caught her before she hit the ground, his arm around her waist, holding her up with an ease that suggested she weighed nothing at all. "Breathe," he said, quieter now that they were alone. "Just breathe." "Why did you do that?" The words came out broken. "Why would you do that?" "Because it was intolerable." He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. "What they did to you was intolerable, and I will not stand by and watch cruelty for entertainment. But now everyone thinks we're engaged. They think I'm your bride." "Yes." He didn't sound bothered by this at all. Daphne finally looked up at him properly. He really was startlingly pale, and his hair wasn't just white, but silver, catching the light like metal. His features were too perfect, too symmetrical, like a statue come to life. Nothing about him seemed quite real. "Who are you?" "I told you, Valdren Silvastian." "That's not what I meant. What are you doing here? You weren't invited to this wedding." "No," he agreed. "I was passing through town and saw the church. I was curious. Human weddings are usually quite different from what I witnessed today." Human weddings. The phrase stuck in her mind, odd and deliberate. As opposed to what kind of weddings? He smiled, just a slight curve of his mouth. "The kind I attend." Before she could press him further, the church doors burst open and people started flooding out. Her mother reached her first, grabbing her shoulders and asking if she was all right, if she knew this man, if she wanted them to call the police. Her father stood behind her mother, looking at Valdren with deep suspicion. Claire and Marcus hung back near the church doors, watching. "I'm fine," Daphne said, even though she wasn't. Even though her whole life had just collapsed in front of everyone she knew. "I just need to go home." "I'll take her," Valdren said. "Absolutely not," her father said. "We don't know you. You also didn't know your daughter's fiancé was sleeping with her sister, so forgive me if I don't put much stock in what you know." Valdren's tone remained polite, but there was steel underneath it. "Daphne, would you like me to take you home, or would you prefer to ride with your parents?" It was the fact that he asked that made her decision. Everyone else had just been talking around her, about her, making decisions about what should happen to her. He asked. "You," she said. "Please." Her mother made a noise of protest, but her father put a hand on her arm. "Let her go, Helen. She's had enough for one day." Valdren guided Daphne to a car parked down the street, a sleek black thing that looked like it belonged in a museum. He opened the passenger door for her and waited until she was seated before closing it gently and walking around to the driver's side. The interior smelled like leather and something else, something faint and sweet that she couldn't identify. "Where do you live?" he asked, starting the engine with a purr so quiet she almost didn't hear it. She gave him the address, and he pulled away from the curb smoothly. They drove in silence for a few minutes, Daphne watching the familiar streets of her small town slide past the window. She'd lived here her whole life. She'd thought she'd be leaving it today to start a new life with Marcus in the city where he worked. Instead, she was sitting in a stranger's car in her wedding dress, driving back to the apartment she'd already packed up. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "Back there. You didn't have to humiliate yourself by pretending you wanted to marry me." "I didn't humiliate myself. I told the truth." "You don't want to marry me. You don't even know me." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I know you were treated abominably. I know you handled it with more grace than anyone else in that church. And I know that when I offered you my hand, you took it, which suggests a degree of courage and trust I find admirable. Or stupidity. No." The word was firm. "Not stupidity. Never say that about yourself." They reached her apartment building, and Valdren parked the car but didn't move to get out. Daphne sat there in her wedding dress, looking at the building where she'd lived for the past 3 years, where she'd kissed Marcus goodbye 1,000 times, where Claire had come over for movie nights and borrowed her clothes and apparently planned how to steal her life. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you go inside, take off that dress and rest. Tomorrow you wake up and begin again." "But what about what you said? About me being your bride?" Valdren was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a card, black with silver lettering. He offered it to her. "If you need anything in the coming days, call this number. I meant what I said in that church. I may have spoken in haste, but I don't make a habit of lying. So you actually want to marry me? A complete stranger? I want you to not have to face the aftermath of today's disaster alone. If that requires maintaining the fiction that we are engaged, then so be it. If it requires something more." He trailed off, studying her face. "We can discuss the particulars when you've had time to think clearly." It was insane. All of it was insane. But then again, so was being left at the altar for her own sister. Daphne took the card, the heavy paper smoothed between her fingers. "Why are you being kind to me?" "Because someone should be." He said it simply, like it was obvious. "And because I despise cruelty, particularly cruelty that masquerades as love." He got out of the car and came around to open her door, offering his hand again. She took it and let him help her out, the skirt of her dress catching on the seat and requiring her to gather it up in awkward handfuls. He walked her to the door of her building, then stopped. "Rest," he said. "I'll call on you tomorrow evening to see how you're managing." "You don't have to do that." "I know, I will anyway." Then he was gone, walking back to his car with that same fluid grace, and Daphne was left standing in the doorway in her wedding dress, holding a black card with a phone number engraved in silver and wondering if the whole day had been some kind of breakdown-induced hallucination. It wasn't. She knew it wasn't because when she got up to her apartment, she found 17 missed calls on her phone and a voicemail from Claire that started with, "I know you're upset, but you're being really selfish about this." Daphne deleted it without listening to the rest. She took off the dress, carefully, because even now she couldn't bring herself to ruin the hours of work she'd put into it. She hung it in the back of her closet where she wouldn't have to look at it, then stood in her shower until the water ran cold and her tears ran out. When she finally crawled into bed, it was mid-afternoon and the sun was still streaming through her windows. She didn't close the curtains. She just lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how Valdren's hand had felt when it closed around hers. Steady, solid, safe. She fell asleep, holding his card. The next evening, Valdren arrived precisely at 6 o'clock. Daphne had spent the day ignoring phone calls and deleting text messages and trying not to think about how everyone in town was probably talking about her. She'd changed into jeans and a sweater, pulled her hair into a ponytail, and was sitting on her couch eating cereal for dinner when the knock came at her door. She checked the peephole and saw him standing there, looking just as impossibly perfect as he had yesterday. She opened the door. "Hello," he said. "May I come in?" "I look like a disaster," Daphne said. "You look comfortable. That's more important." She stepped back and let him enter. Her apartment was small, just a one-bedroom with a kitchen that opened into the living room, but she'd always liked it. Or she had until recently, until it had become the place where she'd planned a wedding that didn't happen. Valdren looked around with interest, his gaze lingering on the bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks and the half-finished knitting project draped over the arm of the couch. "You make things," he observed. "I made my wedding dress," Daphne said, then immediately wished she hadn't brought it up. "Then you're very talented." It was beautiful. He didn't sit down even though she gestured to the couch. He just stood there in her small living room, too tall and too elegant for the space, and she realized he was waiting for her to say something. "I've been thinking about yesterday," she said. "As have I. What you did was crazy. You know that, right?" "I've been alive a very long time," Valdren said. "I've done far crazier things." There it was again, that odd turn of phrase. Been alive a very long time. She studied him more carefully, His skin really was extraordinarily pale, and now that she was paying attention, she realized she couldn't see him breathing. His chest wasn't moving at all. "What are you?" she asked. He smiled, showing teeth that were perfectly white and just slightly too sharp. "Perceptive. Most humans don't notice. Most humans don't get claimed as a bride by a stranger at their own wedding. You're not human." "No, I'm not." Daphne sat down on the couch because her legs suddenly felt unsteady. She'd read books, watched movies, knew the stories. But knowing stories and having one standing in your living room were very different things. "You're a vampire." "Yes." "And you just happened to be passing through town and wandered into my wedding?" "I told you. I was curious. I've been traveling through this region for a few weeks, and I saw the church, and I wondered what a small-town human wedding looked like these days. I haven't attended one in decades." He moved finally, but only to lean against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest. "I didn't expect to see what I saw. So you decided to pretend to claim me. Why?" "At first, instinct. When I saw what they were doing to you, how they were treating you like you were disposable, something in me reacted. It was unconscionable." His dark eyes met hers. "But afterward, when I had time to think, I realized there might be a practical element to what I'd done as well." "Practical how?" "You were left at the altar in front of your entire community. That will have social consequences, whether you deserve them or not. People will talk. Some will pity you. Some will wonder what's wrong with you that your fiancé chose your sister. It's unfair and cruel, but it's reality." He spoke matter-of-factly, not unkindly. "However, if you are engaged to someone else, someone who quite publicly chose you over the chaos in that church, the narrative changes." "So, you're offering to be my fake fiancé?" "I'm offering to be whatever you need me to be. If you want me to maintain the appearance of an engagement until the gossip dies down, I can do that. If you want me to disappear and let you handle this on your own, I can do that as well. But I think you'll find the former option makes your life considerably easier." Daphne thought about going to the grocery store and seeing Mrs. Henderson from down the street, who would definitely ask about the wedding, about running into Marcus or Claire around town, because it was too small a place to avoid them forever. About her parents' worried phone calls and the way her friends had been texting her with increasing desperation. "What would you get out of it?" she asked. "Pretending to be engaged to me?" Valdren was quiet for a moment. "The satisfaction of having thwarted cruelty, and perhaps some entertainment. I've been alone for quite some time. Companionship, even of the temporary variety, has a certain appeal." "Companionship? That's all? What else would I want?" "I don't know. Blood?" She said it hesitantly, not sure if it was rude to bring up. He laughed, actually laughed, and it transformed his face from something cold and austere into something almost warm. "I'm not going to bite you, Daphne. I have no intention of feeding from you. I take blood from willing donors who are compensated for their trouble, or from blood banks when that's not feasible. You would be perfectly safe with me." "Okay," Daphne said slowly. "So you're not after my blood. You're not after my money because I don't have any. What's the catch?" "No catch. Just a man, or whatever you'd like to call me, who saw someone suffering and decided to intervene." He pushed off from the wall. "But I won't force this on you. If you want me to leave and never come back, I will respect that. The choice is yours." She should tell him to leave. She should tell him that she'd handle this on her own, that she didn't need some vampire pretending to be her fiancé, that she'd survive the gossip and the pity and eventually move on with her life. But the thought of facing all of it alone, of being the woman who got left at the altar for her sister, of seeing that story in everyone's eyes every time she left her apartment, made her feel sick. "If we did this," she said carefully, "how would it work?" Valdren sat down on the couch beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "We would spend time together, publicly, let people see us. I would take you to dinner, perhaps to a show in the city. I would meet your parents properly, answer their questions, assure them I'm not a threat. We would allow people to believe we've been seeing each other for some time, that I interrupted the wedding because I couldn't stand by and watch you marry someone else. So we'd be lying. We'd be telling a story. There's a difference. Is there? He tilted his head, studying her. The core of what happened in that church was true. I did choose you. I did claim you as mine. Whether that claim is romantic or simply protective doesn't matter to anyone but us. And when the gossip dies down, when people stop caring, then you decide what you want. We can part ways amicably, or, he paused, or we can reassess. Reassess what? Whether the arrangement has become something more genuine than either of us expected. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. You're saying this could become real. I'm saying I don't know what this will become. I only know that I meant it when I called you my bride yesterday. At the time I thought I was speaking impulsively, but I don't make declarations lightly, Daphne. If I said it, some part of me meant it. He stood, smoothing down his jacket. Think about it. I'll return tomorrow evening for your answer. Wait, Daphne said. He stopped at the door. Why evening? Why not during the day? Sunlight and I don't agree with each other. It won't kill me, but it's extremely uncomfortable. I prefer to conduct my business after dark. So, if we did this, if we pretended to be engaged, I'd only see you at night? Unless you'd like to watch me suffer through daylight, yes. Though I should warn you, I'm deeply unpleasant when I'm in pain. Despite everything, Daphne found herself smiling. Hard to imagine you being more unpleasant than you were to Marcus and Claire yesterday. They deserved it. You don't. He opened the door, then looked back at her. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this remarkably well. Most people would have fallen apart by now. How do you know I haven't fallen apart? Because you're still standing, still thinking, still fighting. That's not what falling apart looks like. Then he was gone, and Daphne was alone in her apartment again. But this time it felt different, less like a tomb and more like a place where she was catching her breath before making a decision. She called her mother. Daphne, honey, we've been so worried, her mother said immediately. Are you all right? Who was that man? Where did he take you? I'm fine, Mom. He took me home. His name is Valdren Silvastian, and we've been seeing each other for a few months. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, what? I know I should have said something sooner. I know the timing is awful. But Marcus and I, we weren't right for each other. I think I knew that for a while. And then I met Valdren, and everything just made sense. Daphne, that doesn't make any sense at all. You were about to marry Marcus. You'd been together for 2 years. I know. But it wasn't real love, Mom. What Marcus and Claire did was horrible, but maybe they did me a favor. Maybe they freed me to be with someone who actually sees me. More silence. Then her father's voice in the background, asking what was happening, and her mother explaining in a rush. Eventually, her father took the phone. Daphne, your mother and I need to meet this man properly. Can you bring him by for dinner? Yes, Daphne said, surprising herself with how steady she sounded. I'll ask him. Maybe this weekend? Saturday night, 6 o'clock. Don't be late. She hung up and immediately texted the number on Valdren's card. If you're serious about this, my parents want to meet you for dinner Saturday at 6. Can you do 6, or is that still too much daylight? His response came almost immediately. This time of year, the sun sets around 5:30. 6 should be manageable. Tell them I look forward to meeting them properly. Daphne set her phone down and realized she'd just committed to this insane plan. She was going to pretend to be engaged to a vampire. She was going to let him meet her parents and lie to their faces about having a relationship with him. She was going to walk around town with him and let everyone see them together and rebuild her reputation on a foundation of fiction. It was crazy. But then again, so was the alternative. On Saturday evening, Valdren picked her up at 5:45. He was wearing another immaculate suit, this one charcoal gray, and he was carrying flowers. Roses, deep red, wrapped in brown paper. For your mother, he explained when he saw Daphne looking at them. First impressions matter. You really have done this before. Meeting parents? Frequently. I've been alive for over 300 years. I've met quite a few parents in that time. 300 years. Daphne tried to process that as she climbed into his car. He'd been alive for 300 years. He'd lived through centuries she'd only read about in history books. He'd probably seen wars and plagues and the entire shape of the world change. "Does it bother you?" he asked as he drove. "My age? I don't know yet. Ask me again after I've processed it." Fair enough. Her parents lived on the other side of town, in the house where Daphne had grown up. Her mother was waiting at the door when they pulled up, and her father was visible through the window, pacing in the living room. Daphne felt her stomach twist with nerves. "They're going to ask you 1,000 questions," she warned. "Good, I have answers." He came around to open her door, offered his hand, and walked with her up the path to the house. Her mother's eyes widened when she got a good look at him, and Daphne realized she'd forgotten to mention some fairly important details, like the fact that he was impossibly pale and had silver hair and looked like he'd stepped out of a Gothic painting. "Mrs. Kendrick," Valdren said smoothly, offering the flowers. "Thank you for welcoming me into your home. These are for you." Her mother took the flowers automatically. "Oh, thank you. They're beautiful. Please come in." Inside, her father was waiting with his arms crossed and his most intimidating expression firmly in place. He was a big man, broad-shouldered from years of construction work, and he'd perfected the protective father routine when Daphne was a teenager. But when Valdren stepped into the living room, even her father seemed taken aback. "Mr. Kendrick," Valdren said, extending his hand. "I'm Valdren Silvastian. I apologize for the dramatic nature of our first meeting." Her father shook his hand warily. "That's one way to put it. You want to explain to me what exactly happened at that church? I saw your daughter being treated with profound disrespect by people who should have cherished her. I reacted. Perhaps not in the most conventional way, but I don't regret it." "And you expect us to believe you and Daphne have been seeing each other? She never mentioned you. Not once." "Because I asked her not to." Valdren's voice remained calm. "We met several months ago at a bookstore in the city. Daphne was there looking for a particular volume, and I happened to have read it. We struck up a conversation. Over the following weeks, we continued to meet, to talk. But she was engaged, and I'm not the sort of man who interferes in commitments. I stepped back. I told her I wouldn't contact her until she'd made a decision about her future." It was a good story, believable, even. Daphne watched her parents' faces and saw them softening slightly. "And the wedding?" her mother asked. "I couldn't stay away. I knew it was wrong, knew I should let her make her choice without my presence complicating things, but I had to see her. I told myself I'd just watch from the back of the church, and then I'd leave. But when I saw what was happening, when I saw that man and her sister, I couldn't remain silent." He glanced at Daphne, and there was something in his expression that looked almost genuine. "I couldn't watch her be hurt like that." "So you decided to announce to the whole church that she was your bride?" her father said. "That's not normal, son." "No," Valdren agreed. "But nothing about that situation was normal. And I'm not normal either, Mr. Kendrick. I'm a very old-fashioned man with very old-fashioned ideas about honor and respect. What I saw in that church was dishonorable, and I responded the only way I knew how." They talked for another few minutes, her parents probing and Valdren answering with a combination of honesty and carefully constructed fiction that was impressive to witness. He told them he worked in acquisitions for a private collector, which explained his odd hours and his obvious wealth. He told them he'd traveled extensively, which explained his accent and his formal manner. He told them he cared deeply for their daughter, which he delivered with such sincerity that even Daphne almost believed it. Dinner was less tense. Her mother had made pot roast, and Valdren ate a small portion with every appearance of enjoyment, though Daphne noticed he mostly just moved the food around his plate. Could vampires eat human food? She realized she had no idea. There was a lot she didn't know about him, about what he was, about how this was actually going to work. "So what happens now?" her mother asked over dessert. "Are you two engaged?" Daphne froze. They hadn't discussed this part. Valdren reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "We're taking things slowly," he said. What happened at the church was impulsive on my part. I don't regret it, but I also don't want to rush Daphne into anything. She's been through a trauma. She needs time to heal, to decide what she wants her future to look like. I'll wait as long as she needs. That's very mature of you, her father said, though he still looked suspicious. Most men your age would be pushing for more. I'm older than I look, Valdren said with a slight smile. I've learned patience. They left shortly after dinner, her parents standing on the porch and waving as Valdren's car pulled away. Once they were out of sight, Daphne let out a long breath. That went better than I expected. Your parents love you. They want you to be happy. I simply convinced them that I contribute to that happiness. He glanced at her. Did I overstep? With the hand-holding? No, it was good. Convincing. Good. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Then Daphne said, "Can you actually eat food? You barely touched your plate." I can eat small amounts. It's not nourishing, but it's not harmful either. It's simply pointless. Like you eating cardboard. That sounds miserable. It's a small price to pay for immortality. Is it worth it? Living forever? He was quiet for a long moment. Ask me again in another 300 years. He drove her home, walked her to her door, and waited while she unlocked it. In the yellow light of the hallway, his features looked softer somehow, less austere, almost tired. Thank you, Daphne said, for tonight, for going along with all of this. You're welcome. We'll need to be seen together more frequently now. Your parents will talk to people, and people will expect to see evidence of our relationship. Where do you live? I realized I don't even know. I have a residence about 40 minutes from here, an old estate that's been in my family, so to speak, for generations. It's private, secure. Very few humans know of it. Could I see it? He looked surprised. You want to see where I live? If we're doing this, if we're pretending to be together, I should probably know more about you than just your name and the fact that you're a vampire. Don't you think? A slow smile spread across his face, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Yes. I suppose you should. Tomorrow night, then. I'll take you to my home, show you how I live. Fair warning, it's not like your apartment. It's quite different from what modern humans are used to. I think I can handle it. We'll see. He left, and Daphne went inside, and for the first time since the disaster at the church, she felt something like excitement stirring in her chest. The next evening, Valdren picked her up in his impossibly elegant car and drove out of town into the wooded hills that surrounded the area. The road grew narrower and darker, trees pressing in on both sides, until finally they turned onto a private drive marked only by a wrought iron gate that opened as they approached. The house at the end of the drive wasn't a house at all. It was a mansion, all stone and tall windows and Gothic architecture that looked like it had been transplanted from another century. Lights glowed in some of the windows, warm against the dark stone, and the whole thing was surrounded by carefully maintained gardens that looked wild in the moonlight. You live here? Daphne asked as Valdren parked in front of the main entrance. I do. Alone, most of the time. I have staff who come during the evening to maintain the place, but they don't live here. He led her inside, and Daphne felt like she'd stepped into a different world. The entrance hall was 2 stories tall with a chandelier that dripped crystals. The floors were dark wood, polished to a shine. The furniture looked antique, the kind of things you'd see in a museum, and the walls were covered in paintings and tapestries that were probably worth more than Daphne would make in a lifetime. This is incredible, she breathed. This is home. He shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over a chair. Come, I'll show you the rest. He took her through room after room, each more stunning than the last. A library with floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books in a dozen languages. A dining room with a table that could seat 20. A sitting room with furniture so ornate Daphne was afraid to touch it. And finally, a more modern section of the house that included a kitchen that looked barely used and a television room with a screen that took up half the wall. I try to keep up with the times, Valdren said, gesturing to the TV. It's not always successful. Do you actually watch anything? Nature documentaries mostly. I find them soothing. Something about that. The image of this ancient, powerful vampire watching nature documentaries in his Gothic mansion made Daphne laugh, really laugh, for the first time since the wedding. Valdren watched her with a puzzled expression. "What's funny? You, this, all of it. I'm standing in a vampire's house laughing about nature documentaries when 3 days ago I was supposed to get married. Is that bad? No, it's good, it's really good." He led her to a sitting room that felt more comfortable than the others, with softer furniture and a fireplace that was already lit. He gestured for her to sit, and she sank into a couch that felt like it was hugging her. Valdren sat across from her in a high-backed chair that suited him perfectly. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "Not the story we're telling people, the truth." So she did. She told him about growing up in the small town, about always feeling like she didn't quite fit there but never having the courage to leave. About her job at the local library, which didn't pay much but which she loved. About meeting Marcus in college and thinking he was her ticket to something bigger, something more, only to realize he was just as small-minded as everyone else. About Claire, who'd always been the prettier sister, the more charming one, and how Daphne had never realized that Claire resented her for being the older one, the responsible one, the one their parents relied on. "She said I was selfish," Daphne said quietly. "In the voicemail she left, she said I was being selfish for being upset that she and Marcus fell in love, like I should be happy for them. That's absurd. Is it? Maybe they really are in love. Maybe I'm the villain in their story." Valdren leaned forward, his expression intense. "Listen to me, Daphne. Love doesn't justify cruelty. If they wanted to be together, they could have told you in private months ago when this apparently started. They could have given you the dignity of ending things cleanly. Instead, they chose to humiliate you publicly, in front of everyone you know, at what should have been one of the happiest moments of your life. That's not love. That's selfishness. That's cowardice. You really believe that? I know it. I've lived through centuries of human behavior, and I can recognize cruelty when I see it." Daphne felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of guilt and confusion she'd been carrying since the church. "Thank you for saying that. It's only the truth." They talked for hours about his life and hers, about the differences between the world he'd grown up in and the one she knew. He told her about being turned in the early 1700s, about the vampire who'd made him and then abandoned him to figure out immortality on his own. About the decades of loneliness before he'd found others like him, a whole society of vampires living in secret among humans. About eventually becoming what he was now, something like royalty in their world, though he brushed off her questions about his exact title and responsibilities. "It's complicated," he said, "and dull. Court politics usually are. You're a king, aren't you? That's what you said in the church. Valdren Silvastian. Silvastian sounds like a royal name. It's a name I chose when I needed one. And yes, I suppose you could call me a king, though we don't use that terminology much anymore. I'm the head of my bloodline, which means I'm responsible for the vampires descended from me and those who've sworn fealty to my house. How many is that? Enough. Several dozen directly, hundreds indirectly. And none of them are here with you? I prefer solitude most of the time. Too many vampires in one place tends to lead to drama." She laughed again. "Even immortal beings have drama?" "Especially immortal beings. When you live forever, you have a lot of time to hold grudges." It was nearly midnight when Valdren finally drove her home. Daphne felt drained, but in a good way, like she'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. When they reached her apartment building, Valdren walked her to the door, as he always did. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "I have business tomorrow evening. Court matters I can't postpone. But the day after?" "It's a date. Well, a fake date." "Perhaps." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so gentle and unexpected that Daphne's breath caught. "Or perhaps it's becoming less fake than either of us planned." Then he was gone, moving with that supernatural speed that made him seem to simply vanish, and Daphne was left standing in her doorway with her heart racing and her thoughts in chaos. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. Valdren would pick her up most evenings, and they'd go somewhere public. Dinner at the nicest restaurant in town, where everyone could see them together. A movie at the small local theater, a walk through the park that had just put up their autumn decorations. Each time, people stared and whispered, and Daphne watched the narrative shift in real time. She wasn't the woman who got left at the altar anymore. She was the woman who'd been secretly seeing someone else, someone clearly wealthy and devoted, and who'd escaped a bad situation. It should have felt manipulative. It should have felt wrong. But Valdren made it easy because he wasn't just playing a part. He was genuinely interested in her, genuinely attentive. He remembered things she mentioned in passing, like her favorite coffee order or the author she'd been meaning to read. He noticed when she was tired and suggested they cut the evening short. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, never tried to kiss her or hold her hand unless they were in public and it was necessary for the act. But the act was getting harder to separate from reality. She found herself looking forward to seeing him each evening, found herself disappointed on the nights when he had to cancel for vampire business, found herself noticing details about him she hadn't before, like the way he listened with complete focus when she talked, or the way his rare smiles transformed his entire face, or the way he sometimes touched the small of her back when guiding her through a door, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly it made her heart stutter. On the Friday 2 weeks after the disaster wedding, her phone rang. Marcus. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Daphne, he said. He sounded strained. We need to talk. I don't think we have anything to talk about. Please, just give me 10 minutes. I'll come by your apartment. I need to explain. Explain what? How you and my sister have been having an affair for months? How you humiliated me in front of everyone I know? I think that's pretty self-explanatory, Marcus. It's not what you think. Claire, she convinced me that you didn't really love me. She said you were only marrying me because it was expected, because we'd been together so long. She said I deserved to be with someone who was passionate about me. Daphne felt a surge of anger so intense it surprised her. So, you decided to find out on our wedding day? You couldn't have had that conversation with me beforehand? I'm sorry. I know I should have. I was weak and I was confused and I made a terrible mistake. But Daphne, I want to fix this. I want us to try again. What? That man you're with, he's not right for you. Everyone can see it. He's too old, too strange. This is just you acting out because I hurt you. Come back to me. We can still have the life we planned. Are you insane? Daphne couldn't believe what she was hearing. You left me for my sister and now you want me back? Claire and I aren't working out. She's not who I thought she was. She's clingy and demanding and all she talks about is money. Your inheritance, actually. That's what she really wanted. She convinced me that if we got married, we could contest your grandfather's will, get access to the money he left you. The inheritance. Daphne had almost forgotten about it. Her grandfather had passed away 6 months ago and left her a modest sum, nothing life-changing, but enough to be significant. It was tied up in trusts and legal paperwork, and she'd barely thought about it since the reading of the will. So Claire just wanted my money. I didn't know that at the time, I swear. I thought she loved me, but now I see it was all manipulation. Daphne, please, you have to understand. I was the victim here as much as you were. Get off my property, Daphne said coldly, and don't ever contact me again. She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking. The whole thing felt surreal, like a bad television drama. Claire had manipulated Marcus into leaving Daphne at the altar so they could get married and contest the inheritance. It was so calculated, so cruel. It made her feel sick. She called Valdren without thinking. Daphne? He answered on the first ring. Is everything all right? Marcus just called. He wants me back. He said Claire was just using him to get to my inheritance. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice colder than she'd ever heard from him. Where are you? At my apartment. I'm fine. I told him to leave me alone. I'm coming over. Don't let anyone in until I get there. He arrived 20 minutes later, and Daphne had never seen him look the way he did when she opened the door. His eyes were darker than usual, almost black, and there was a tension in his frame that suggested violence barely contained. Tell me everything, he said. So she did. She explained about the inheritance, about Marcus's phone call, about Claire's plan. Valdren listened without interrupting, but she could see his hands clenching and unclenching, the only outward sign of his anger. "This inheritance," he said when she finished. "How much are we talking about?" "About $200,000. It's enough to make a difference, but not enough to change my life dramatically. My grandfather wanted to make sure I was taken care of." "And your sister knew about it?" "She was at the will reading. She got some money too, but less. The bulk of it came to me because I was named after my grandfather's mother. He always said we had the same spirit." Valdren stood and began pacing, which was startling because he was usually so still. "This changes things." "How?" "Because your sister and ex-fiancé aren't just cruel, they're actively trying to defraud you. If they'd married, they would have had legal standing to contest the will, particularly if they could prove you and Marcus had been engaged at the time of your grandfather's death. They could argue the assets should be considered marital property. But we weren't married." "No. But they might have tried anyway. The law is complicated, and sometimes the threat of a long legal battle is enough to force a settlement." He stopped pacing and looked at her. "However, if you were to marry someone else, someone with the resources to fight any legal challenge, the situation would be very different." Daphne's heart started beating faster. "You're talking about us actually getting married. I'm talking about making our arrangement real. Not forever if you don't want that, but for long enough to secure your inheritance, to make it impossible for your sister and Marcus to touch it." "That's insane." "Is it? What's the alternative? Wait for them to file a lawsuit? Spend months or years fighting this in court while they drag your name through the mud? Or we get married, the inheritance becomes protected as part of your marital assets in a different household, and they have no case. But we barely know each other. We've spent nearly every evening together for 2 weeks. We've talked more in that time than most couples do in months, and I've enjoyed every moment of it." He moved closer, his expression softening. "Daphne, I'm not suggesting this because I want to trap you or control you. I'm suggesting it because it's the practical solution to a very real problem, and because I care about you, more than I expected to when I walked into that church." "You care about me?" "Yes. Is that so surprising? You're a vampire king who's lived for 3 centuries. I'm a small-town librarian who got left at the altar. We're not exactly an obvious match. Perhaps that's what makes it interesting." He reached out and took her hand, the same way he had in the church that first day. "I'm not asking you to love me, Daphne. I'm not even asking you to stay married to me forever. I'm asking you to trust me to protect what's yours and to give us a chance to see if this connection we've developed is something real." She should say no. She should tell him this was moving too fast, that she needed more time, that marrying a vampire she'd known for 2 weeks was the definition of insane. But then she thought about Claire's smug face in the church, about Marcus calling to say he wanted her back, like she was a toy he'd loaned out and now wanted returned, about spending months fighting a legal battle she might not even win. And she thought about Valdren, who'd defended her when no one else had, who'd spent hours listening to her talk about nothing important, who looked at her like she mattered. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." His eyes widened. "You're certain?" "No, I'm terrified, but I'm also angry, and I'm tired of being the victim in this story. So yes, let's get married." A slow smile spread across his face, and this time when he looked at her there was something almost tender in his expression. "Then I should probably do this properly." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hand, and Daphne felt her breath catch. It was absurd, him kneeling in her small apartment in his expensive suit, but it also felt right in a way she couldn't explain. "Daphne Kendrick," he said, his voice formal but warm. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to protect you, to respect you, and to spend whatever time we have together making sure you never regret this decision." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." He stood and pulled her into his arms, and Daphne realized this was the first time they'd truly embraced. He was solid and cool, and he held her like she was something precious, and she found herself leaning into him, letting herself be held. "We'll need to do this quickly," he said into her hair. "Before Marcus and Claire can file anything, I have connections. We can be married by the end of the week. My parents will freak out. We'll tell them the truth, part of it anyway, that we want to be together and don't see the point in waiting, they'll understand. They didn't. Not really. But they also didn't try to stop it. Her mother cried and said this was all moving too fast, but her father just looked at Valdren and said, "You'll take care of her?" "With my life," Valdren replied, and he said it with such conviction that even Daphne's father seemed satisfied. The wedding was nothing like the one that had been planned with Marcus. It was held at Valdren's estate, in a small chapel on the grounds that Daphne hadn't even known existed. There were no crowds, no elaborate decorations, just her parents, a handful of Valdren's vampire associates who stood in the shadows and watched with ancient eyes, and a minister who asked no questions about the rush. Daphne wore a simple dress she'd bought at a shop in the city, cream-colored silk that fell to her ankles. Valdren wore black, as always, but he'd pinned a silver brooch to his lapel that he said had belonged to his mother 300 years ago. The ceremony took less than 20 minutes, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Valdren kissed her for the first time. It was gentle, almost chaste, but Daphne felt it all the way to her toes. When he pulled back, he was smiling, that rare, genuine smile, and she found herself smiling back. "Hello, Mrs. Silvastian," he said softly. "Hello, husband." They held a small reception in the dining room, though calling it a reception was generous. It was mostly just her parents asking nervous questions, while Valdren's vampire associates lurked in corners and made everyone uncomfortable. One of them, a woman named Seraphine, who looked about 20 but was apparently older than Valdren, pulled Daphne aside. "You know what you've done?" Seraphine asked. She had white hair like Valdren, but hers was styled in elaborate braids, and her skin had a faint blue tint that suggested she was very, very old. "Married a vampire? Married our king. Made yourself a target for everyone who wants to challenge his power or curry his favor. This isn't a human marriage, girl. This is a political alliance, whether you meant it that way or not. Valdren said I'd be safe with him. He'll try to keep you safe. He's protective by nature, and he clearly cares for you. But you need to understand what you've entered into. Our world isn't like yours. It's older, crueler, and far more dangerous. Then maybe you should make sure I know how to survive in it," Daphne said, surprising herself with her boldness. Seraphine studied her for a long moment, then laughed. "I see why he chose you. You have spine. Good. You'll need it." The party, such as it was, ended early. Daphne's parents left with promises to call soon and obvious relief at escaping the vampire-filled mansion. The vampire guests melted away into the night. And then it was just Daphne and Valdren, standing alone in the enormous house that was now apparently her home too. "I should clarify something," Valdren said. "I don't expect you to share my bedroom. This marriage may be legal, but I'm not going to demand anything from you that you're not ready to give. You can have your own space, your own life. I won't impose on you." "Where do you sleep?" Daphne asked. "Do you even sleep?" "I rest during the day, though it's not quite the same as human sleep. I have chambers in the lower levels of the house, somewhere dark and secure." "Can I see?" He looked surprised. "You want to see where I rest?" "We're married. That means this is my home now too, right? I should probably know all of it." He considered this, then nodded. "Come with me." He led her down a hallway she hadn't explored before, to a door that opened onto a staircase carved from stone. They descended into darkness that Valdren navigated easily while Daphne had to hold onto the railing. Eventually they reached another door, this one made of heavy wood reinforced with iron. Inside was a room that looked like it belonged in a medieval castle. Stone walls, a large bed with heavy curtains that could be drawn for complete darkness, shelves lined with books and strange artifacts. It was beautiful in its own way, but also deeply alien. "This is where you spend your days?" Daphne asked. "Yes, it's not much, but it serves its purpose." "It's incredible. Like a piece of history." He smiled. "I suppose it is. Most of these items have been with me for centuries." She walked around the room, looking at everything. A sword mounted on the wall that looked ancient and well-used. A portrait of a woman in old-fashioned dress who might have been his mother. Books in languages she didn't recognize, and on the bedside table something that made her stop. It was a dried flower, a rose. carefully preserved, sitting in a small glass case. "What's this?" she asked. Valdren came to stand beside her. "From the flowers I brought your mother the night I met your parents. One of them had come loose from the arrangement. You picked it up and said it was too pretty to throw away. I kept it." "You kept a flower I touched?" "I keep things that matter to me." She looked up at him, this impossibly old and powerful creature who'd married her to protect her inheritance and who kept dried flowers because she'd said they were pretty. "I don't understand you." "What's to understand?" "Why you're doing this. Why you care. You could have anyone. You've lived for centuries. You must have had dozens of lovers, hundreds even. Why me?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Because when I saw you in that church, standing there with everyone betraying you, you didn't cry. You didn't scream. You just stood there with your head high taking it, and I thought, there's someone who doesn't know her own strength. And then you took my hand when I offered it, trusted a stranger in the middle of your worst moment, and I thought, there's someone brave. And in the weeks since, spending time with you, learning who you are, I've thought, there's someone I could care about, someone I do care about. Even though I'm human, especially because you're human. You're mortal and fragile and temporary, and that makes every moment with you precious in a way immortality can never be." "I'm going to age," Daphne said. "I'm going to get old and die, and you'll still be exactly as you are now." "I know. Doesn't that bother you?" "Yes, but not in the way you think. It bothers me because I wish I could give you more time. But it doesn't change how I feel." "How do you feel?" He leaned down and kissed her, deeper this time, his hand sliding into her hair. Daphne kissed him back, her hands finding his shoulders, and she felt something in her chest crack open. This wasn't fake anymore. This wasn't pretend. This was real, whatever it was, and it terrified her. When he pulled back, his eyes had gone dark again, but not with anger, with something else. "I feel like I've been alone for 300 years, he said quietly, "and I'm only just now remembering what it's like not to be." They stood there in his ancient underground chamber, newly married and barely knowing each other, and Daphne made a decision. She took his hand and said, "Teach me about your world, all of it. I want to know everything." "It's dangerous knowledge. I don't care. If I'm going to be married to a vampire king, I should probably know what that means." So, he taught her. Over the following weeks, Valdren introduced her to his world with a patience that surprised her. He explained vampire hierarchy, how there were bloodlines and houses and courts that governed different regions. He told her about the laws that kept vampires hidden from humans, about the penalties for breaking those laws. He showed her how to recognize other vampires, the subtle signs that marked them as something other than human, and he introduced her to his court. It happened on a crisp October evening, exactly 1 month after they'd married. Valdren had warned her it was coming, that the other vampires in his bloodline would want to meet her officially, but nothing could have prepared Daphne for walking into a room full of immortal predators. They gathered in the great hall of Valdren's estate, dozens of them, all pale-skinned and beautiful and deeply unsettling. They watched her with ancient eyes as Valdren led her to a raised platform at one end of the room. Seraphine was there, along with several others Daphne had met briefly at the wedding. But there were also new faces, vampires who looked at her with open curiosity or thinly veiled hostility. "This is Daphne," Valdren announced, his hand firm on her lower back. "My wife and your queen. You will treat her with the respect and deference she deserves." Queen. The word sent a thrill of fear through Daphne. She wasn't queen material. She was a librarian from a small town who'd accidentally married into vampire royalty. But she stood there beside Valdren with her head high, the same way she'd stood in that church, and she met the eyes of every vampire in the room. Some looked away, some smiled. One, a man with scars on his face that suggested even vampires could be damaged, stared at her with open calculation. "She's human," the scarred vampire said. "Fragile, mortal. How long before she becomes a liability?" "She's under my protection," Valdren said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Anyone who touches her answers to me. And when she dies of old age in 50 years, what then? Then I'll grieve. But that's my concern, not yours. The scarred vampire smiled, showing too many teeth. Of course, my lord, I meant no disrespect. After the formal presentation, there was what Valdren called a gathering, which seemed to be vampire code for a party where everyone was too polite and no one ate anything. Daphne found herself surrounded by immortal beings who asked her careful questions about her life and her marriage, while clearly assessing whether she was a threat or an opportunity. Seraphine rescued her eventually, pulling her aside to a quieter corner. You're doing well, better than I expected. I feel like I'm going to throw up. That's normal. Court always feels like that, even for us. Too many egos in one room. That vampire who asked about me dying, he's going to be a problem, isn't he? Kale? Probably. He's been angling for more power in the bloodline for decades. He sees Valdren's attachment to you as a weakness. Is it a weakness? Seraphine looked at her thoughtfully. That depends on you. If you let fear control you, if you hide behind Valdren's protection and never stand on your own, then yes, you'll be a weakness. But if you learn, if you grow strong in your own right, then you could be something else entirely. What? An asset. A bridge between our world and yours. Someone who understands both sides. I'm human. I don't have any power. You're married to the most powerful vampire in this region. That gives you more power than you realize. And power isn't always about strength or magic. Sometimes it's about influence, about connection. You could be very valuable if you chose to be. Daphne thought about that as the evening wore on. She watched Valdren move through his court, commanding and confident, and she saw how the other vampires deferred to him even when they clearly disagreed. He was king not just because he was old or strong, but because he knew how to lead, how to balance mercy with force. When they finally left the gathering and returned to the quiet of Valdren's private chambers, Daphne felt exhausted in a way she'd never experienced. You did well tonight, Valdren said, loosening his tie. Kale's challenge was expected. He won't try anything overt, but watch for subtle moves. Seraphine said I could be valuable, that I could be a bridge. She's right. You are. He looked at her seriously. I married you to protect you, but I won't lie and say there aren't benefits for me as well. Having a human queen sends a message to my court that I'm not stuck in the old ways, that I understand the world is changing, but only if you're willing to take on that role. What would that mean? Learning our laws, our customs, attending court functions, eventually perhaps mediating disputes that involve both humans and vampires. You'd be my partner in truth, not just on paper. And if I don't want that? If I just want to be your wife and not your queen? Then you just be my wife and I'll never ask for more. He said it simply, honestly, and Daphne believed him. He would let her choose her own level of involvement in his world. He wouldn't force her into a role she didn't want. But she found that she did want it, not because of the power or the status, but because it felt like something she could be good at. She'd spent her whole life being useful in small ways, helping library patrons find books, organizing community events, supporting other people's dreams. This felt like a chance to be useful in a bigger way, to build something meaningful. Teach me, she said, everything I need to know to be your queen. He smiled, that rare, wonderful smile. It would be my honor. The education took months. Valdren introduced Daphne to vampire law, a complex system that had evolved over thousands of years and which governed everything from territory disputes to feeding rights. He taught her vampire history, the old bloodlines and the wars they'd fought, and the uneasy peace they'd eventually achieved. He brought in tutors, other vampires who specialized in diplomacy or linguistics or human-vampire relations, and Daphne absorbed it all with the same focused intensity she'd once applied to her library science degree. And through it all, her marriage to Valdren deepened from something pragmatic into something genuine. It happened in small moments. Valdren leaving a book on her nightstand because he'd remembered her mentioning she wanted to read it. Daphne having blackout curtains installed in his underground chambers because she'd noticed the regular curtains sometimes let in cracks of light that bothered him. the two of them talking until dawn in his library, debating vampire philosophy and human ethics. The way he'd taken to sitting beside her rather than across from her, close enough that she could feel the cool presence of him even when they weren't touching. The way she'd started thinking of the estate as home rather than Valdren's house. They didn't discuss it directly. Neither of them seemed ready for that conversation. But Daphne felt the shift, and she thought Valdren did too, in the way his rare touches became more frequent, more lingering. A hand on her shoulder as he passed, fingers brushing hers when he handed her something, standing close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. It was winter, 6 months after their wedding, when everything changed. Daphne had been helping Valdren with a territorial dispute between two vampires in his bloodline. It was tedious work, reviewing claims and counterclaims and ancient agreements written in languages she had to struggle to read. They'd been at it for hours in Valdren's study when Daphne finally threw down her pen in frustration. "This is ridiculous. They're fighting over a hunting ground that hasn't been used in 50 years. Can't you just tell them to work it out, or you'll assign it to someone else?" "I could," Valdren said. He was sitting across the desk from her, reviewing his own stack of documents. "But that would set a precedent that I make arbitrary decisions. Better to go through the process, follow the law, even when it's tedious. No wonder you need a queen. This would drive anyone insane." He looked up at that, his expression unreadable. "Is that what you think you are, my queen?" "Aren't I? I mean, you introduced me that way to your court." "Titles and reality aren't always the same thing. I called you my queen because it was politically necessary. I wanted to know if you felt like one." Daphne thought about it. 6 months ago she would have said no immediately. But now, after months of studying vampire law and attending court functions and slowly earning the respect of Valdren's bloodline, the answer was different. "I'm starting to. It's strange. I still feel like I'm playing pretend sometimes, but then I'll be in a meeting with your advisors and I'll make a suggestion and they'll actually listen, and I think maybe I'm not pretending anymore." "You're not. You've become invaluable, Daphne. To my court and to me personally." "Just to your court?" He set down his documents and stood, moving around the desk to stand in front of her. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking if this is still an arrangement. If we're still just two people who got married for practical reasons, or if it's become something else. What do you want it to be?" She stood too, closing the small distance between them. "I want it to be real. I want us to be real. We are real. We've been real for months. I just wasn't sure if you felt the same way." "I do. I have for a while now." He cupped her face in both hands, his touch gentle despite his strength. "I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we make this marriage a true one in every sense, there's no going back. You'll be mine, and I'll be yours, and I protect what's mine with everything I have. It won't be easy. You're human, which means you're vulnerable. There will always be people who see that vulnerability as an opportunity. I'll spend the rest of your life keeping you safe from threats you can't even see. Is that what you want?" "Yes, because I trust you. And because I love you." The words came out before she could second-guess them. But once they were out, she knew they were true. She loved him, this ancient, powerful creature who'd claimed her as his bride to save her from humiliation, and who'd somehow become the person she trusted most in the world. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they were blazing. "I love you too. I have for months. I was just waiting for you to catch up." Then he kissed her, and this time there was nothing gentle about it. This was hunger and need and months of restraint finally breaking. Daphne kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, and when he lifted her onto the desk, she wrapped her legs around his waist and pulled him closer. They made love there in his study, surrounded by legal documents and ancient books, and it felt like a claiming on both sides. Afterward, Valdren carried her to his chambers, and they spent the rest of the night tangled together in his enormous bed, talking and touching and learning each other in ways they'd been too cautious to before. "I have to tell you something," Valdren said as dawn approached, and he knew he'd need to rest soon. "Something I should have mentioned before now. That sounds ominous. It's about your sister and Marcus." Daphne tensed. She'd been so wrapped up in her new life that she'd almost forgotten about them. What about them? They did try to contest the inheritance, about a month after our wedding. But when my lawyers responded with documentation of our marriage and made it clear we were prepared to fight indefinitely, they withdrew the claim. You didn't tell me? You were just starting to heal. I didn't want to drag you back into that ugliness. And I wanted you to choose this life, our life, without feeling like you owed me something for protecting you. I do owe you. No, you don't. I didn't do it for gratitude or obligation. I did it because it was right, because you deserved better than what they tried to do to you. Daphne kissed him softly. Still, thank you. They fell asleep as the sun rose, Daphne curled against Valdren's cool chest, feeling safer and more at home than she'd ever felt in her life. The next several months were the happiest Daphne had ever known. She and Valdren settled into their marriage fully, no longer just partners in a practical arrangement, but true spouses who loved and supported each other. She continued her work as his queen, and the vampires in his court slowly accepted her not as a curiosity or a weakness, but as a genuine partner to their king. Seraphine became something like a friend, teaching Daphne the subtle art of vampire politics and how to read the currents of power in court. Other vampires, seeing that Valdren's queen wasn't going anywhere, began to approach her with their own concerns and requests. She mediated disputes, offered advice, and slowly built a reputation as someone fair and thoughtful. But the happiness couldn't last forever. In a world of immortal beings, change was inevitable. The challenge came in the spring, almost a year after Daphne and Valdren had married. Kyle, the scarred vampire who'd questioned her humanity at that first gathering, had been building support among the more traditional members of Valdren's bloodline. He'd been subtle about it, never openly defying his king, but always questioning, always suggesting that Valdren's attachment to a human was making him weak. And then, at a major court gathering in April, he made his move. "My lord," Kale said, standing in the center of the great hall where dozens of vampires had assembled, "I challenge your right to lead this bloodline." The room went silent. Daphne, sitting beside Valdren on the raised platform, felt ice flow through her veins. She'd learned enough about vampire law to know what this meant. A formal challenge could only be answered one way. "On what grounds?" Valdren asked. His voice was calm, but Daphne could see the tension in his shoulders. "On the grounds that you've allowed your attachment to a human to compromise your judgment. You've elevated a mortal to a position of power she has no ability to defend. You've made our bloodline vulnerable for the sake of sentiment." Daphne has proven herself a capable queen. Many in this room have come to her for counsel and left satisfied. Capable for a human, perhaps. But she'll be dead in 50 years, and what then? Will you elevate another human, and another after that? How many of our secrets will you expose to the mortal world for the sake of your pets? Daphne felt anger surge through her, hot and bright. She started to stand, to defend herself, but Valdren's hand on her arm stopped her. "I'll give you one chance to withdraw your challenge," Valdren said. His voice had dropped to something deadly. "Apologize to my queen and leave this court peacefully." "I won't. I can't stand by and watch you destroy what took us centuries to build. Face me, Valdren. Prove you're still strong enough to lead." Valdren stood, and the movement was so fluid and threatening that several vampires near the platform took an instinctive step back. "Then I accept your challenge. We fight tonight, under the old laws, to submission or to the final death." Daphne grabbed his hand. "Don't. He's trying to bait you." "He's succeeded." Valdren looked down at her, and his expression softened slightly. "This was always going to happen eventually, my love. Better to end it now than let him continue to sow discord." "But what if you lose?" "I won't." The fight was held in the gardens behind the estate, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the gathered crowd. Daphne stood at the front with Seraphine beside her, watching as Valdren and Kale faced each other on a stretch of grass that had been cleared for the combat. "He'll win," Seraphine said quietly. "Valdren is older and stronger. Kale is a fool for challenging him. Then why am I terrified? Because you love him. Love makes us vulnerable to fear." The fight started with a speed Daphne could barely follow. One moment the two vampires were standing apart, and the next they were crashing together with a sound like thunder. They moved faster than human eyes should be able to track, a blur of pale skin and dark clothing and violence. Valdren fought with controlled precision, each movement economical and devastating. Kale fought with rage, all wild swings and snarls. It didn't last long. Within minutes, Valdren had Kale on the ground with a hand around his throat and a knee on his chest. Kale struggled, but it was clear he was beaten. "Do you yield?" Valdren asked. "Never. Kill me if you're going to, but I won't serve under you while that human weakens us." "Then you've made your choice." Valdren's hand tightened, and Daphne looked away before she could see what happened next. There was a sound like breaking branches, then silence. When she looked back, Kale was still on the ground, but he wasn't moving anymore. Valdren stood over him, his clothes torn and splattered with blood that looked black in the torchlight. "Let this be a lesson," Valdren said, addressing the assembled court. "I chose my queen, and I will defend that choice with my life. Anyone else who wishes to challenge that decision is welcome to face me, but know that I will not be merciful a second time." No one moved, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the vampires began to kneel, acknowledging their king's dominance. Even the ones who'd been sympathetic to Kale's cause bowed their heads in submission. Valdren walked through the kneeling crowd to Daphne. He was covered in blood and dirt, and his eyes were still that deep, dangerous black. But when he reached her, he stopped and waited. "Are you all right?" Daphne asked. "I should be asking you that. You just watched me kill someone. To protect me. To protect us. So yes, I'm all right." She reached up and touched his face, not caring about the blood. "Are you?" "Now that I know you're safe, yes." She kissed him there in front of the entire court, and the gathered vampires watched in silence. It was a statement as much as an embrace, a declaration that she stood with her husband regardless of what anyone thought. When they finally pulled apart, Seraphine was smiling. "Well," she said, "I think that settles any remaining questions about whether she's truly your queen." The incident changed things. The vampires who'd doubted Daphne before stopped questioning her authority. The ones who'd been neutral became supportive, and the ones who'd already respected her became fiercely loyal. She'd stood beside their king after he'd killed to defend her. She'd claimed him as hers in front of everyone. She was queen not just in title, but in truth. But it also changed Daphne herself. She'd seen the violence vampires were capable of, had watched the man she loved kill without hesitation. It should have frightened her. Maybe it did. A little. But it also made her understand the world she'd married into, the stakes involved in being a vampire queen. That night, after the court had dispersed and the body had been removed, Daphne found Valdren in his study. He'd cleaned up, changed clothes, but she could still see the weight of what he'd done in his eyes. "I never wanted you to see that side of me," he said when she entered. "The violence, the cruelty. It wasn't cruel. It was necessary. It was both. Kale gave me no choice, but I could have ended it faster. I didn't. I made a spectacle of it to send a message." She crossed to him and took his hands in hers. "You protected me. You protected your court. Yes, it was violent, and yes, it was frightening. But I'm not some delicate flower who's going to break because I saw you be what you are. You're a vampire, Valdren. A king. You've lived for centuries. This is part of who you are. You're not afraid of me? I'm afraid of losing you, but I'm not afraid of you. There's a difference." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperation she'd never felt from him before. "I love you, so much it terrifies me sometimes. You're everything I didn't know I needed. I love you too, and we're going to be fine. The court respects us. We have allies. We have each other. That's enough." It was enough for a time, but Daphne couldn't forget what Kale had said, the question he'd raised that Valdren had never answered. What happens when she ages? When she dies? Will Valdren spend the next 50 years watching her grow old while he stays exactly the same? Will he grieve her for the next 300 years after that? The question haunted her. Not because she regretted marrying him, but because she couldn't stand the thought of leaving him alone again. He'd been alone for so long before her. She didn't want to be just a brief bright spot in his immortal life, someone he remembered wistfully centuries from now. So she did something she probably should have discussed with him first. She went to Seraphine. "I want to become a vampire," Daphne said. They were in Seraphine's quarters, a suite of rooms in the East Wing that was decorated in a style that predated anything Daphne had ever seen. Ancient tapestries, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, candles that were the only light source. Seraphine looked at her for a long moment. "Does Valdren know you're asking me this?" "No. I wanted to understand what it would mean before I talked to him about it." "Clever. Valdren is protective. He'd probably refuse the idea immediately if you just asked him to turn you. But if you come to him with knowledge, with a real understanding of what you're requesting, he might listen." She gestured to a chair, and Daphne sat. "Do you understand what you'd be giving up?" "My humanity, my mortality. More than that, the sun, warm food, the taste of anything but blood. Children, if you ever wanted them. Vampires can't reproduce. Your family, your old life. Anything that ties you to the human world would have to be abandoned or carefully maintained through lies. But I'd have time. Centuries with Valdren instead of just decades. Yes, if you survive the turning. It's not gentle, Daphne. Many humans die in the transformation. Their bodies can't handle the change. What are the odds? Better than they used to be. Maybe 70-30 in your favor. But that still means there's a 3 in 10 chance you'd die in agony while Valdren watched. Daphne absorbed this. A 30% chance of death. It wasn't insignificant, but it also meant a 70% chance of immortality, of a future where she didn't have to leave Valdren alone. If I decide to do this, how would it work? Seraphine explained the process. The vampire who wanted to turn a human had to drain them almost to the point of death, then feed them vampire blood. The human body would either accept the transformation or reject it violently. The whole process took 3 days, and they were apparently 3 days of excruciating pain as the body died and was reborn as something else. "You'd need to be in a secure location," Seraphine said. "Somewhere you couldn't hurt yourself or others during the transition. The pain makes newly turned vampires unpredictable. Would Valdren stay with me? If you asked, he wouldn't leave your side. But it would be torture for him, watching you suffer and being unable to help." Daphne thought about this, turning it over in her mind. Then she asked the question that mattered most. "Do you think I should do it?" Seraphine was quiet for a long time. Finally she said, "I think you've already decided. You're just looking for permission or validation. But I'll tell you this, Daphne. I've been alive for over 1,000 years. I've seen countless humans become vampires, and most of them regret it eventually. The immortality they thought they wanted becomes a burden. The price they paid seems too high. But every now and then I see someone who's truly meant for this life, someone who thrives as a vampire in a way they never could as a human. I think you might be one of those rare exceptions." "Why?" "Because you've adapted to our world better than any human I've seen. Because you've embraced your role as queen instead of resenting it. Because you love Valdren with the kind of devotion that transcends mortality. And because I think you're strong enough to survive the transformation and everything that comes after." It was the encouragement Daphne needed. She thanked Seraphine and went looking for Valdren. She found him in the library, reading by candlelight even though the house had perfectly good electric lighting. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "There you are. I was beginning to think you'd vanished. I was talking to Seraphine about becoming a vampire." The book in his hands fell closed. "What?" She sat down beside him and took his hand. "I've been thinking about it for months, ever since Kale challenged you and raised the question of what happens when I age and die. And I realized I don't want to die, Valdren, not if it means leaving you alone for the next 3 centuries. So I want you to turn me." "No." "Just like that? No?" "Daphne, you don't understand what you're asking. The process is agonizing. There's a significant chance you wouldn't survive. And even if you did, you'd be giving up so much." "I know." Seraphine explained everything, the risks, the losses, all of it. "And I still want this." "Why? We're happy as we are. We're happy now. But what about in 10 years when I'm starting to show my age? 20 years when I'm middle-aged? 30 years when I'm elderly and you still look exactly the same? Will you still love me then? Yes, without question. I believe you. But I don't know if I can stand it. Watching myself age while you don't. Knowing that every year that passes is 1 year less we have together. I want forever, Valdren, with you. Isn't that what you want too? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "It's what I want more than anything, but I also want you to be safe, to be happy. What if the transformation kills you? I could never forgive myself. And what if it doesn't? What if I survive and we get to spend the next 1,000 years together? Isn't that worth the risk? Not to me. You're worth more than any amount of time." She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Then trust me to make my own decision about my own life. I'm not asking for your permission, Valdren. I'm asking for your help. I'm asking you to be the one who turns me because I can't imagine anyone else doing it. But if you refuse, I'll find another vampire who will." His eyes darkened. "You will not. No one touches you but me. Then do it yourself." They stared at each other, wills clashing. Finally, Valdren looked away. "Give me time to think about it. This isn't a decision to make lightly." "How much time?" "A few days, a week at most. I need to make sure everything is prepared, that we have the best possible chance of success." "So that's a yes?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "It's a terrified, reluctant yes. I'll turn you because I can't bear the thought of someone else doing it, and I can't bear the thought of losing you to time. But Daphne, if you die during the transformation, I'll never forgive either of us." "I won't die. I'm too stubborn." He laughed, a sound that was half sob. "Yes, you are. It's one of the things I love most about you." They spent the next week preparing. Valdren consulted with Seraphine and other ancient vampires who'd successfully turned humans before. He arranged for a secure room in the deepest part of the house, somewhere Daphne could scream and thrash without being heard by anyone outside the estate. He stocked it with blood for after the transformation, both human and animal, so Daphne would have choices when she woke, and Daphne said goodbye to her human life. She visited her parents, though she didn't tell them what she was planning. She just spent an afternoon with them, drinking tea in their kitchen and listening to her mother gossip about the neighbors. Her father asked if she was happy with Valdren, really happy, and she told him honestly that she was happier than she'd ever been. She went to the library where she'd worked before marrying Valdren and donated most of her books, keeping only a few favorites. She drove through the small town where she'd grown up, past the church where she'd almost married Marcus, and she felt nothing but gratitude that things had turned out the way they had. On her last day as a human, she woke up in Valdren's arms and just lay there, memorizing what it felt like. The warmth of the sun through the curtains, the sound of birds outside, the steady beat of her own heart. All things she'd lose when she became a vampire. "Are you ready?" Valdren asked. "Yes. Are you?" "No, but I'll do it anyway because you asked me to." They went down to the prepared room together. It was bare except for a bed and restraints that would keep Daphne from hurting herself during the transformation. Seraphine was there, along with 2 other vampires Daphne had come to trust. They would help Valdren if things went wrong. "Last chance to change your mind," Valdren said. "I'm not changing my mind. I love you. I want this life with you. Now stop stalling and bite me." He smiled despite the fear in his eyes. Then he pulled her close, tilted her head to expose her throat, and bit down. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Daphne felt his teeth pierce her skin, felt him drinking her blood, and her legs gave out. He caught her, lowering them both to the bed, and continued to feed. She could feel herself weakening, could feel her heartbeat slowing, and she thought, "This is it. This is where I die, or become something new." Just before she lost consciousness, Valdren pulled back and bit his own wrist. He pressed it to her mouth, and blood, cold and strange tasting, flowed across her tongue. She swallowed reflexively, and then the real pain began. It felt like fire in her veins, like her body was being torn apart and rebuilt from the inside out. She tried to scream, but nothing came out. She was dimly aware of being restrained, of Valdren's voice saying her name over and over, of time passing in agonizing increments. The transformation took 3 days. 3 days of pain so intense she couldn't think, couldn't do anything but endure. She hallucinated, saw memories and dreams and nightmares all tangled together. She felt her human body dying, felt something else taking its place, and then, finally, it stopped. Daphne opened her eyes and the world looked different, sharper, clearer. She could see individual dust motes floating in the air, could hear conversations happening floors above her, could smell blood and stone and age. She sat up, and the restraints that had held her snapped like thread. "Daphne." Valdren was beside her immediately, his hand on her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" "Yes." Her voice sounded strange. "I can hear everything. Is it always this loud?" He laughed, the sound full of relief. "You get used to it. How do you feel?" She took inventory. The pain was gone, replaced by a strange emptiness and a hunger she'd never experienced before. Her body felt powerful, like she could tear through walls if she wanted to, and Valdren, he was so beautiful it hurt to look at him. "I'm hungry," she said. He held up a bag of blood, hospital style. "Start with this, slowly. You need to learn control before we try anything else." She drank, and it was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. The hunger eased, and with it came clarity. She'd survived. She was a vampire now, immortal. "How long?" she asked. 3 days, like we expected. You've been unconscious for about 18 hours since the transformation completed. Seraphine said that's normal. Your body needed time to stabilize. I made it. You did. You terrified me, but you did." She looked at her hands, turning them in the low light. They looked the same, but paler, the veins less visible. She touched her face and felt her teeth, which seemed normal until she concentrated and felt them lengthen into fangs. "This is incredible," she breathed. "This is forever," Valdren said. "You're one of us now. My queen in truth, immortal and powerful. No one can question your right to stand beside me. Is that why you think I did this? For politics? No. I know why you did it. For us. So we could have time." She turned to him and kissed him, and it was different now. She could feel his coolness and know it matched her own, could taste blood on both their tongues, could sense the power in him that she now shared. When they pulled apart, she said, "So what happens now?" "Now you learn what it means to be a vampire, how to hunt, how to feed safely, how to control your new strength. It'll take time, but you have plenty of that now." "We have plenty of that," he smiled, that beautiful, rare smile. "Yes, we do." The first few months as a vampire were challenging. Daphne had to learn how to move without breaking things, how to feed without killing, how to exist in a world that suddenly seemed fragile and loud and overwhelming. But Valdren was patient, and Seraphine was helpful, and slowly Daphne adapted to her new existence. She discovered that being a vampire queen was very different when you were actually a vampire. The court took her more seriously now. The vampires who'd been polite but distant became truly respectful. She could enforce her decisions with strength if necessary, could move through vampire society without needing Valdren's protection, and her relationship with Valdren deepened in ways she hadn't expected. They were equals now in a way they hadn't been before. Partners, not just in love, but in power, in purpose. They hunted together, governed together, faced challenges together. The centuries stretched out before them, full of possibility. One evening, about a year after her transformation, they stood together on the balcony of the estate, looking out over the grounds. It was the same place where Valdren had first brought her, where she'd seen his home for the first time as a human. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Giving up your humanity?" Daphne considered the question. She'd lost things, certainly. The sun, though she'd learned to walk in it with great discomfort for brief periods. Normal food, though she didn't miss it as much as she'd expected. Her family, though she still visited them carefully, aging herself subtly with makeup and lies to explain why she didn't seem to change as quickly as she should. But she'd gained so much more. Time with Valdren. Power to protect what mattered to her. a place in a world she'd never known existed, and a future that stretched out endlessly, full of adventures she couldn't yet imagine. "No," she said, "I don't regret it. This is where I'm meant to be. With me, with you, always." He pulled her close, and they stood there together under the stars, two immortal beings who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other over and over again. Somewhere in town, in the house where Daphne had grown up, her parents were probably having dinner. Somewhere else, Claire and Marcus were living whatever life they'd built after their scheme failed. The world continued spinning, humans living and dying and moving through their brief, bright lives. And in a Gothic mansion hidden in the woods, a vampire king and his queen stood together, content in the knowledge that they had forever to spend together, that the love that had started in chaos and grown in patience would last as long as they did. Years would pass, decades, centuries maybe. They would face challenges and enemies and changes that neither could predict. But through it all, they would have each other, bound together by choice and love, and a vow spoken in a church that neither of them would ever forget. Daphne thought back to that day sometimes, to standing at the altar watching her sister steal her groom. She thought about how devastated she'd been, how humiliated, how certain that her life was over. She'd been wrong. Her life hadn't ended that day. It had just been waiting to begin, waiting for a silver-haired stranger to take her hand and call her his bride. Everything that came after, all the joy and love and eternity, had started with that single moment of unexpected grace. "Thank you," she said quietly. Valdren looked down at her. "For what? For claiming me? For saving me? For loving me? I should be thanking you. You made my immortality worth living again. You gave me purpose beyond survival. You gave me everything. Then I guess we're even. I guess we are." They kissed there on the balcony as the moon rose over the estate, two immortal beings bound by love that would outlast time itself, and Daphne knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The end of her old life had been the beginning of something infinitely better. And as she stood in her vampire king's arms, eternal and powerful and deeply impossibly in love, she couldn't imagine wanting anything else. This was her happily ever after. Not the one she'd planned with Marcus, but something far more wonderful and strange and perfect. A happily ever after that would last forever, with a man who'd seen her at her lowest moment and chosen her anyway. Her sister had stolen her groom. The vampire king had taken her hand and called her his bride. And Daphne had found her true home in the darkness, with forever stretching out before her like a promise.